In the Christian vernacular, there are few words as charged as mission. Ask what comes to mind, and some people might say Mother Teresa, the kindly, unassuming type of mission that runs soup kitchens and builds hospitals, all while wearing worn-out shoes. Others might say that mission makes them think of one of those TV ads that run in the early afternoon, imploring you to donate just 5 cents a day to feed a starving child Bibles for a year. Or something like that. Some point to mission as something their great aunt or uncle did, packing up all their belongings and leaving on a steamship to spread the gospel somewhere overseas. And for others, mission was when a foreign person came to their great-grandparents' community, built a strange-looking church, and told them all to start speaking English. So which is it? How do we, as followers of Christ, reconcile with a calling that originates directly from Jesus, but over the course of 2,000-odd years has been laced with suffering, cultural erasure, and genocide? How do we celebrate the genuine good that has come from mission, and also acknowledge the pain? Shoot, where do we start? These are some of the questions that we'll be chasing here on MissionWary. Each episode will look at what mission means in the Mennonite context, whether it's in the past, the present, or the future. We'll talk with pastors, thought leaders, and partners around the world. We'll explore why some people are, justifiably, wary of mission. But we'll also dig into why being a holistic witness to Jesus in our world, a broken world, is just as important as it's ever been. This is MissionWary. Thanks for joining us. Hi there, and welcome to MissionWary, a podcast put on by Mennonite Mission Network. My name is Travis.
And I'm Lynda.
And we are your hosts for this podcast episode, the very first inaugural podcast episode for MissionWary. I guess I shouldn't speak for Lynda necessarily, but I'm really excited to be here. I work for Mennonite Mission Network as both a writer and a multimedia content producer, which usually is videos, but I suppose includes podcasts.
Yeah, and I have the privilege of working on a team with Travis. I also am a writer, and I have actually worked for Mennonite Mission Network, or one of its predecessor agencies, for my whole adult life. It's been my only employer since I graduated from college, so mission is important to me.
So this being the first episode, I guess we should set the scene a little bit for people listening. And Lynda, you can weigh in here. But for me, I am broadcasting out of my bedroom. I'm here at my standing desk. I have a little acoustic shell set up. I have clothes strewn about underneath the microphone and off to the side to reduce the echo a little bit. There's clothes strewn about the rest of the room, of course, but those aren't quite as strategically placed for echo cancellation.
But I loved what you said about the importance of having clothes strewn all around the room. Everyone in my family will be happy to know that, there's a purpose for having clothes strewn around.
Some people have been practicing to host podcasts their entire lives.
My kids and my husband.
Perfect. Anyway, the main goal of this podcast is to take a closer look at some different aspects of the word mission. But we also understand that not everyone listening will have the same understanding of what mission is that I do, or that Lynda does, or any guest will have on here. The way each person feels when they hear the word mission depends on a lot of factors, including the community or the church they grew up in, and their understanding of faith and calling. Now, normally, each episode of MissionWary will have one guest. But for this episode, we wanted to have a couple voices speaking about how, from their viewpoint, mission could be viewed as something to be a little wary of, as well as something to celebrate. Kind of a broad overview of two viewpoints that can both exist at the same time. Like most things in life, mission is complex, it's layered, and sometimes it's messy. And Lynda, who has spent her entire adult life working in and around mission, has graciously offered to talk about some of her own experiences in what that messiness can look like. So, Lynda, to start off with, would you be willing to walk through your relationship with the idea of mission?
Yeah, well, as I was growing up, I was a pious little kid, I grew up in a Mennonite family, started out, my parents were mission workers in Philadelphia. They came from rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. As a little kid, I remember wanting to grow up to be a missionary. Being a missionary was following Jesus and telling people about Jesus, which was the most important thing in my life, That's what my parents did, and that's what I wanted to do. And I think when I learned to read, I probably read every missionary story in our church library. When I played dolls, the living room couch became an ocean liner and was taking us to some remote country across an ocean somewhere so we could tell people about Jesus. That's what I thought my life was going to be about. But this title, MissionWary, going from MissionWary with a question mark to missionary has been my life's journey, really. So I went from this little kid who wanted to grow up to be a missionary, but in high school and college started learning things. We didn't use the term doctrine of discovery at that time, but realizing how much early mission walked hand in hand and was responsible for genocide of indigenous peoples, and how there were actually documents that state that send missionaries to go along so that their trail is blazed for commerce, in quotes, subdue the natives so that our, rubber plantations, our gold mines won't be disturbed by people who are against us. All of that stuff that I was learning in high school and college really made me turn against mission as being colonialistic, imperialistic, evangelism as being arrogance. That was my kind of journey through high school, and by the time I graduated from college, was very much entrenched in that way of thinking. 4 months after my college graduation, I find myself in Zaire with a Christian Relief and Development Agency. I must say, through it all, I think my main motivation as a college graduate was the adventure. I think as a kid, I loved the stories of how people live differently in other places, and that's always intrigued me. So I would say that the reason I found myself in Zaire was not because I was going with a Christian Development and Relief Agency. It was because I wanted adventure and I didn't have any money, and that was the way to get there. To be honest, that's why I found myself in Zaire.
Yeah, because that seems like a pretty dramatic turnaround to have a mindset jaded against mission through high school and college, but then 4 months later find yourself in another country with a Christian relief organization, right? Like, that's a pretty big turnaround.
Well, I was very adamant when I arrived that nobody should think of me as a missionary. I did everything I could to set myself apart. For example, on Sundays, I wouldn't be found very often in the church built with red bricks imported from England. Most Sundays, I would be on a trek off through the rainforest to visit people in the villages, like maybe my students would say, oh, come to visit my family in this or that village. But often it was to visit the worship service of Elima Nzale, a young woman who was quite versed in biblical teaching. She had attended Catholic Mass some in her life. She knew what the Bible said, and she knew what Jesus said. Her services would translate the message of Jesus into the music and dances of her culture. She embodied spiritual presence through trances and healing. Being in a worship setting, with the cathedral of the forest canopy and the cool air instead of a hot, stuffy brick church, And I think most of all what I loved there was the feeling of well-being, that people were at peace with themselves and each other and God. I mean, it was such a wonderful sense of just being there. The North American culture in which I grew up has excelled in separating one thing from another, honing in on differences. I learned to separate the physical from the spiritual, distinguish between intuition and scientific data. So it was enlightening and healing for me to learn from my new community in Zaire about reality as being of one piece, to enter more deeply into the reality of an interconnected universe and the importance of relationships between people and the cosmos. And as I sort of absorbed that worldview, just became aware of how meaningful God and Jesus and all that I had been taught was. But the other thing, there was a woman in the village, her name was Mamantumbi, and Mamantumbi had eyes that didn't look in the same direction. The one muscle was weak or something. She had also been through 3 husbands. 3 of her husbands had died. And most of all, she never bore children. And so there is really she's not a woman in the sense of that ethnic identity, because what makes you a woman is bearing children. And so here was this woman outcast for many reasons, but her community was taking in Peace Corps and young non-governmental workers and missionary workers who weren't married. I mean, she would take us in. We were her family. We'd sit in her kitchen. We'd talk with her. She'd give us amazing food. And of course, she expected gifts from us too. So there was that kind of sadness that somebody couldn't be different and still be part of the community. There was also the funeral. I mean, when somebody died, there was what I felt as a North American, excessive grief and mourning, wailing throughout the night for days and, weeks. And then after 40 days, starting it all up again, just, throwing ashes on yourself and just total grief. Partly because if you didn't properly grieve someone who is departed, their spirit could come back and haunt you or curse you. You needed to properly grieve them. Some people would indebt themselves for the rest of their lives to offer a proper funeral ceremony for their departed father or grandmother or whomever. Later then, they would be unable to pay school fees for their children or offer them adequate nutrition. So there were all these things that I was learning in my 3 years there. When it came time to leave, I had this path that I needed to walk on out to a road where I'd catch a truck that would take me to the city where I'd get a plane and start my journey home. So as I was walking that road with my friends, just realizing how they had given me everything they had. They had shared their language, their religious traditions. If I would go to their house, they would kill their only chicken to make sure I had a meal. If we were in a remote village, they would give me the best bed in the village to make sure I had a good night's sleep. Just thinking of that kind of generosity and, thinking, how can I ever repay this generosity? And realizing that I hadn't shared probably what was the most precious thing that I could share. A belief in a Jesus who has power over death, a God whose perfect love casts out all fear. And I would say it was kind of a Damascus Road experience there on that little forest path, just kind of asking God for another chance. Could I do this again? Can you give me another chance? So that was in 1981, and God answered that prayer. So what's it been since 1981? It's almost 40 years that I've been privileged to work at Mission in a different way. And I'm just so grateful that there are mission agencies like Mennonite Mission Network that really questions traditional ways of doing mission and allows us to explore ways to do mission differently. That's kind of my story from MissionWary to missionary.
So, Lynda, you've done a great job of walking us through a few of the reasons why you had been wary of mission and the way that it's been practiced in the past, but also how you grew into a more full viewpoint of what mission can be.
Yeah. Going with that, we can't expect people to be answerable to what we know today, generations ago. I mean, I must say I have highest respect for missionaries who went following God's call, who would pack their belongings in a coffin because they knew they weren't coming back. They were following God's call till death. They might have not used the language we would use, but that kind of commitment and dedication, we build on their shoulders today, the foundation they laid. It is a true foundation, despite some of the idiosyncrasies and the real harm that has been done. So I don't want to just bash it.
And that can be such a difficult balance to strike, right? There's that temptation of saying something was either all good or all bad. You either write it off or you hold it up on a pedestal. And mission, like so many other things, is some of both, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that excites me about this podcast format, is that through each episode, we'll have time to delve deeper into the nuances of mission and to slowly fill in that broader, more balanced view of what mission in a Mennonite context looks like.
Yeah, I am too.
So in the second half of this episode, we wanted to talk with someone who could help give us a baseline definition of what mission actually means and why we, as followers of Christ, can be excited about it, why we should be excited about it. And this probably won't come as a surprise to you, but Mennonite Mission Network is connected with a lot of people who are excited about mission. But if we wanted someone who is particularly keen on defining mission, what it means, where it came from, well, there was really only one person who would do. We needed to talk to Joe. So we did. Hi, Joe. Welcome to MissionWary. We're so glad to have you here on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for inviting me to be on. This is real exciting for me.
And I guess I would start out with asking if you'd elaborate a little bit on your personal connection with mission.
For the last almost 5 years, I've been a church relations representative for Mennonite Mission Network, which means that I connect with various geographical areas of the Mennonite Church USA that I'm assigned to. And then I also just promote mission generally across the church. I think of myself as like an advocate for mission. And from 2006 through 2014, Anna, my wife, and I were international mission workers in South Africa through Mennonite Mission Network. And we had 2 sons when we went. And then when we were there, we had 2 more sons. So we really raised our family in cross-cultural ministry, which is a definition of mission. I guess I'm getting straight into the definitions now, which is maybe,
please.
Maybe okay, but an influential article, I guess, that's helped to give some language to what I'm talking about, I read by a missiologist who spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe, and I think he grew up in India, but he's from the Episcopal Church. His name is Titus Pressler. He wrote an article called "Mission is Ministry in the Dimension of Difference." He said there is a specific place for mission, even in the 21st century, because there's been a trend to define everything that the church does as mission. He says, actually, the broader category for the church is ministry. Like everything that the church does, in a sense, is ministry. whether that's the meeting of your deacons, or whether it's pastoral care for your members, or whether it's preaching. But mission is a specific subset of ministry that describes that you're actually reaching out beyond your own. And you're serious about connecting with the world to understand what the needs of the world are and try to meet those needs with the good news of Jesus Christ. So, ministry in the dimension of difference. So some of those major distinctions would be religious difference, cultural difference, ethnic differences, socioeconomic differences are some of the major divides that keep us separate and kind of hinder the movement of God's Spirit among us. I think that takes us back to some of the original impetuses for doing mission in the first place, which are things like the Great Commission, which we have a certain variation of that in every one of our Gospels in the Bible. We think of it most commonly in Matthew 28, where all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, says Jesus. Therefore, as you go, make disciples of all nations, right? Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And as you do this, I'm with you to the end of the age. So that's in Matthew, and then Mark has an extended version. And these were both very influential texts for the 16th century Anabaptists, who often quoted the Great Commission in Matthew and Mark, very commonly in like the court records where they were being interrogated by the authorities about why are you preaching in this geographic district? And moreover, why are you preaching when you're not an ordained clergy, but they were just people that were filled with the Spirit of God? And so the message of Jesus Christ is a liberating message that frees people from the power of the things that oppress them, from sin. And sin is things that we participate in, but it's also things that are done to us that bind us. So that's how I would put mission. That's how I understand mission, to be that positive sense of life-affirming movement that God's people are called to participate in through Jesus' Spirit.
So, Joe, when you talk with people who may have a different definition of what mission means than you do, how do you establish a base understanding between the both of you that you can build a conversation on?
I think it's helpful with a term like mission to know a little bit more about where it comes from. I mean, it comes from a Latin word simply meaning sending. Before it was used in the context of colonialism, it was actually used in the Latin translation of the Bible for what God did in relation to the Son. God sent the Son. And then if we revisit the life of Jesus, we see that Jesus was a humanizing figure. I mean, someone that related to people in healthy ways and didn't come to re-oppress the already oppressed. Like in Peter's sermon in Acts, when he's talking to Cornelius' Gentile household, he said, Jesus of Nazareth, who went around doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. That was his statement about Jesus. So maybe that's one logical or rhetorical strategy that I would use to just work at redefining terms or putting the word mission in a different context, related more to the character of God than to just the colonial context, which we have to acknowledge and talk about. But if we're going to continue to use the word mission, we need to redefine it in terms of the way that God relates to the world through Jesus.
Yeah, I liked two earlier on when you were talking, Joe, you had two phrases in describing mission, liberating love and life-affirming movement. And Travis, I'm thinking back to how I talked about my kind of Damascus Road experience. And so those words weren't in my mind, but I think Joe's using them describes very well how that shift from being mission-wary to missionary worked for me as I saw God at work in the 3 years that I was working there in Zaire, or Democratic Republic of Congo. So yeah, just thank you for those words, Joe. I think that has a lot to do in reclaiming mission, maybe, when we use those kind of definitions. And like you said, acknowledge the colonial baggage and all that harm, but going back to what it really is, realizing that was all an abuse. That's not part of God's plan. That was
right.
That was our sin of which we need to repent.
Right, right. A few sources that have been very influential for me are things like Andrew Walls and Lamin Sane, a West African scholar. They talk about the theology of translation in that the Christian faith spreads by translation. So everywhere that Christianity goes, it has to go by translating the message into the language of the people that are there. This is kind of like mitigating factors to missionary arrogance in a way, because when people hear the liberating message of Jesus in their own languages, it becomes a standard by which they can judge missionary behavior. They say, why are you not living up to the message? So translation unlocks this dynamic that maybe the carriers of the message didn't even intend. They may have been intending to promote Western civilization, but translation unlocks this power that ends up toppling sort of the colonial powers. Again, we don't want to deny the fact that colonialism was insidious and nefarious and still exists. But there's also another side to the story in which the gospel was doing its work.
Joe, thank you for talking with us. This has been great.
Thank you for putting this format together.
So, that's our first episode. We hope you enjoyed it. For more information about what Mennonite Mission Network is doing through partnerships across the U.S. and around the world, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or go to our website, MennoniteMission.net. And if you're curious about what's on the next episode of MissionWary, well, remember the long list of historical events that Lynda named as things that made her wary of mission?
We didn't use the term doctrine of discovery at that time, but realizing how much early mission walked hand in hand and was responsible for genocide, all of that stuff that I was learning in high school and college really made me turn against mission as being colonialistic, imperialistic.
On the next episode, we'll dig a little deeper into what the doctrine of discovery actually is, and the connection between mission, colonialism, and the ground underneath our feet. See you then.